He stood at the altar with his hands folded and his jaw set, and he did not look at her once. Not when the music stopped, not when the murmur spread through the pews like a slow fire, not when Amara Brooks walked the last 12 steps toward him in a dress that had taken her 4 months to pay off, carrying flowers her grandmother had helped her choose, with a smile she had practiced in the mirror that morning because she was so nervous she kept doing it wrong. Marcus looked at the floor. Then he looked at his phone. Then he looked at his best man, who looked away. And then he spoke. "I can't do this." 3 words, flat, almost bored, like he was canceling a dinner reservation. The church went silent in that particular way that only happens when something so humiliating occurs in public that everyone present simultaneously decides they did not witness it. Amara stood there in the silence with her bouquet and her paid-off dress and her practiced smile, and for 3 full seconds, her brain refused to process what her ears had just delivered. "Marcus." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "What are you—" "I'm sorry." He still wasn't looking at her. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months." Months. He had been trying to figure out how to say it for months, and he had chosen now. This moment. This dress. This church full of her mother's friends and his colleagues and the cousin who had flown in from Houston specifically to see this. If you were standing in that church watching this happen to someone you loved, you would have done something. You would have stood up. You would have said something. You would have at least handed her a glass of water. But nobody moved. And Amara Brooks, 34 years old, second-grade teacher, woman who had spent 11 months planning a life with this man, did the only thing she could think to do. She put the flowers down on the altar step, very carefully, like they were something that mattered, and she walked out. If you have ever watched someone you love get humiliated in public and been helpless to stop it, this story is going to hit somewhere deep. Stay with us until the end, because what Amara does next, and who she meets, is the kind of thing that only happens in real life when real life decides it's had enough of playing it safe. And if this story finds you today, hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. 3 weeks later, Amara was in Seoul, South Korea, and she was on her 3rd glass of something expensive she couldn't pronounce, sitting at a bar in a hotel that cost more per night than she made in a week. And she was composing a text to her best friend Destiny that said, "He invited me to the wedding. He actually sent me a save the date." Who does that? She deleted it. She had already sent 12 variations of that text in the past 10 days, and Destiny, who was a patient woman by any standard, had responded to each one with the same measured combination of outrage and concern that Amara appreciated deeply but was currently unable to receive. She put her phone face down on the bar. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing you ordered from a specific printer in Buckhead that Marcus had mentioned once and that Amara had bookmarked on her phone because she'd thought, back then, that maybe they would use them someday. His name at the top. A woman named Ji Yeon Park listed below it. The wedding was in Seoul. His new world, apparently, the world he had chosen over the life they were supposed to build in Atlanta. A destination wedding. 3 weeks after he left her at the altar. Her colleagues at the school had been carefully, painfully kind about the whole thing. Her mother had been loud and furious in the way only Atlanta mothers can be, which Amara had found both comforting and exhausting in equal measure. Her students had noticed she was sad and had, with the particular instinct of 7-year-olds, started bringing her things. A crayon drawing, a sticker that said "Great job," a slightly crushed granola bar from a jacket pocket, and leaving them on her desk without comment. She had cried in the supply closet twice. The Seoul trip had been planned before any of this. A spring break visit to a college friend named Soo Jin, who lived in Mapogu and had spent 6 months insisting that Amara come see the city. When the invitation arrived, Soo Jin, who had heard the full story in a 3-hour phone call, had said very simply, "You should still come, and you should go to that wedding, and you should walk in looking like you have not thought about that man one single time." Amara had laughed. It was the first real laugh in 3 weeks. The problem was that she hadn't thought very far past the walking in part. She had no one to walk in with. She had no presence that said, "I am doing extraordinarily well, and you made a catastrophic mistake." She had a good dress, packed mostly out of spite, and a grandmother's ring she wore on her right hand because she couldn't stand the idea of leaving it in Atlanta, and a plan that had several significant holes in it. She ordered a fourth drink. The bar she was sitting in occupied the top floor of a tower in Gangnam, the kind of place where the lighting was calibrated to make everyone look like the best version of themselves. And the music was so tasteful, it was almost invisible. Soojin had brought her here as a sort of orientation exercise. This is where the money sits when it wants to be seen but not approached. And then disappeared 40 minutes ago to take a call from her boyfriend, leaving Amara alone with her phone and her thoughts, and the slow, creeping awareness that she was the only person in the room sitting by herself. She was trying not to think about Marcus. She was, specifically, not thinking about the way he had said, "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months," with the same voice he used to tell her the dishwasher wasn't loaded correctly. The same flat managerial tone, like she was a logistical problem he had finally found time to address. She pressed her thumb against the stone of her grandmother's ring. "You look like you're calculating something." The voice came from 2 seats down. She hadn't noticed him sit down. She had been staring at the bar's surface. And when she turned, her first impression was simply that he was very still. Most people, when they sit at a bar, arrange themselves in some way that signals openness or occupancy. They lean in or they lean out. They look at their phones or they watch the room. This man did none of those things. He sat like someone who had decided this was where he would be and found the decision completely settled. He was Korean, somewhere in his late 30s, dressed in a dark suit that had clearly been made for his body specifically. He had a glass of water in front of him. Not liquor, just water. And his hands were folded on the bar with the same quality of stillness the rest of him projected. His face was hard to read. Not cold exactly. More like a face that had learned to keep its own counsel and had been doing it for a long time. "Excuse me?" Amara said. "You've been looking at the bar for 10 minutes and your expression changes every 30 seconds, he said. "Either you're calculating something or you're having a very complicated conversation with yourself." His English was precise, accented but exact, with the careful diction of someone who had learned the language as a serious undertaking rather than a casual one. Amara looked at him for a moment. Under normal circumstances, she would have been guarded. A stranger at a bar making observations about her face was not an automatically comfortable situation. But the drinks had softened the edges of her caution, and there was something in his delivery that was so absent of any conventional flirtation that she found herself responding to it as she would respond to a statement of fact. "Both," she said. He nodded like that was a reasonable answer. "What are you calculating?" She almost deflected. She almost said something light and dismissible, the kind of response that closes a conversation down before it can become one. But she was 4 drinks into an evening that had started with her rereading a wedding invitation she should have thrown away, and the honest answer was right at the surface. "Whether I can pull something off," she said. "That requires a prop I don't have." He turned his water glass a quarter turn. "What kind of prop?" "A person." She picked up her own glass. "Specifically a person who looks like he belongs in rooms like this and can act like he's with me without making it obvious that he's not." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that meant he was actually thinking about what she'd said rather than preparing his next line. "You need someone to perform a function," he said, "for one event. 3 weeks from now. A wedding." She looked at him sideways. "You look like you belong in rooms like this." "Most people assume I belong in rooms like this because of what I do," he said. "What is it you think I do?" She studied him. The suit, the stillness, the water instead of alcohol, the way he had been sitting alone in one of the most expensive bars in Seoul without looking like he needed company. "Security," she said. "High-end, private, the kind where the client list is confidential." Something crossed his face, so fast she might have imagined it. A flicker of something she couldn't name. "That's an interesting guess," he said. "I'm a good guesser." She extended her right hand. "Amara Brooks, Atlanta, Georgia, 2nd grade teacher." He looked at her hand for a beat before he took it. His grip was firm and brief and completely controlled. "Kong Min Jae." "Mr. Kong," she said, "I need a date to my ex-fiancé's wedding. I need someone who will walk into that room with me and make it completely obvious that I have not spent the last 3 weeks crying in a supply closet." She paused. "I can pay." He said nothing. "I have—" She reached into her bag and stopped. She had approximately $400 in Korean won that she had exchanged at the airport and a credit card that was closer to its limit than she preferred to think about. Neither of those was the kind of payment that said, I am a serious person making a serious offer. She thought for 1/2 second about what she actually had that was worth something. She pulled the ring off her right hand. She set it on the bar between them. It was her grandmother's ring. Rose gold, antique, with a small diamond in a setting that was older than her mother. Her grandmother had worn it for 53 years. When she died, she left it specifically to Amara with a note that said, "For the woman you're becoming." Amara had worn it every day for 4 years. She had worn it through her first year teaching. She had worn it the day Marcus proposed with a different ring, a bigger one, that was now sitting in a drawer in her apartment in Atlanta. She had worn it to the altar. "This is worth more than what I'm asking," she said. "It's real. I'm not negotiating. 3 weeks, one event, you play the part convincingly." She looked at him steadily. "I know what I'm doing." She was not entirely sure she knew what she was doing. Minjae looked at the ring, then he looked at her. The same quality of assessment he'd been applying since she turned around. Not intrusive, not calculating in the way that made her uncomfortable, just genuinely attentive, like he was reading something that required care. "You're serious," he said. "Completely." "You don't know who I am." "You told me your name." "That's not what I mean." She held his gaze. "Are you going to hurt me?" A pause. "No," he said. "Are you going to rob me?" "No." "Then who you are beyond that is something I can learn or choose not to." She picked up her glass. "Do you want the job or not?" The bar noise continued around them. Someone laughed across the room. A glass clinked. The invisible music shifted from one careful song to another. Minjae reached out and placed 2 fingers on the ring without picking it up. He considered it the way you consider something that is asking more of you than it appears to be. Then he moved his hand back. "Keep the ring," he said. Amara blinked. "I'll do it." "You'll—" She stopped. "Without the ring." "Yes." "Why?" He picked up his water glass. "Because you look like someone who has already given up more than she should have," he said, "and that ring is not something you should give up." She stared at him. He was a stranger. She had known him for 11 minutes. He had said nothing charming and made no particular effort to impress her and offered her no explanation for why a man of obvious wealth and calibrated composure would agree to spend 3 weeks performing a fiction for a woman he had never met, in exchange for nothing. None of that was reassuring. All of it made her feel, for the first time in 3 weeks, like something was about to happen that she hadn't planned for and couldn't predict, and that it might, possibly, not be a disaster. She picked up the ring and slid it back onto her right hand. "There are conditions," he said. "Okay. You do what I tell you to do in public. You don't ask questions in front of other people. You keep your own schedule outside of what we've agreed." He paused. "And if at any point I tell you to leave somewhere, you leave. Without argument. Immediately." She frowned. "That last one is non-negotiable." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're either in security or you're something else," she said slowly. He said nothing. "Which is it?" The flicker again, brief, contained, and this time she was sure she hadn't imagined it. "We can discuss the details tomorrow," he said. "I'll have someone contact your friend Soo Jin." He said the name without pause, without accent, like he already knew it. "She'll arrange the logistics." The chill moved through Amara before she could stop it. "How do you know about Soo Jin?" He set down his water glass and straightened his jacket without hurry. "You mentioned you were visiting a friend," he said. "It's a reasonable inference in a city where most English-speaking visitors know at least one local." She thought back. She did not think she had mentioned Soo Jin's name. She was almost certain she hadn't. He rose from the bar stool with the same unhurried stillness that had characterized everything about him, and he laid 2 bills on the bar that she didn't even look at because she was still thinking about the name. "Get some rest, Ms. Brooks," he said. "You look like you haven't slept properly in a while." He walked toward the exit, and the crowd did something she had only seen happen around very specific kinds of people. It parted for him without anyone seeming to make a conscious decision to do so. Not because he was large or loud or made any demand, but because the space around him had a quality that said this person does not get in anyone's way and no one gets in his. Amara sat at the bar with her grandmother's ring on her finger and her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Behind her, her phone lit up. "Soo Jin, girl, where are you?" I got a message from someone's assistant saying we have a breakfast meeting tomorrow at 8. Who did you talk to tonight? Amara looked at the exit where Kang Min-jae had been. She picked up her phone. I'll explain in the morning, she typed. She looked at the bar where his water glass still sat, barely touched, with a small ring of condensation around its base. She thought, he knew her friend's name. She thought, he didn't take the ring. She thought, he said no to both of her questions with such quiet certainty that it hadn't occurred to her until right now to wonder why she believed him. She left the bar a few minutes later into a Seoul night that was colder than she expected and full of light in every direction. And she had the particular feeling of someone who has just agreed to something they don't fully understand yet, but who understands, with a certainty that lives below logic, that they would make the same decision again. 3 weeks to the wedding. One stranger who knew too much too fast, and a plan that had more holes in it now than it did an hour ago, but somehow felt for the first time like a plan at all. The breakfast meeting was at a place that didn't have a sign outside. Soo-jin found this detail alarming. Amara found it consistent with everything else about the previous night that she had not yet fully processed. They arrived at 8 exactly. Soo-jin had insisted on punctuality with the anxious energy of someone who had spent the whole taxi ride alternating between "Who is this man?" and his assistant called from a private number and knew my full name. And a man in a dark jacket met them at a door on a side street in Gangnam and led them through a corridor and into a private room with a low table and food already arranged, and Kang Min-jae already seated. He was reading something on his phone. He put it away when they entered without making a production of it. Ms. Brooks. He looked at Soo-jin. Ms. Yoon, thank you for coming. Soo-jin sat down with the careful posture of someone trying very hard not to show that she was scared. Amara sat down next to her and thought, in the daylight, across a table, he looks exactly the same as he did last night, which meant the stillness wasn't the bar or the lighting or the late hour. It was just him. Before we start, Amara said, I want to know how you knew her name. Min-jae poured tea into 3 cups with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had been asked questions he didn't intend to fully answer many times before. When someone approaches me with a proposal in a public setting, he said, I gather available information. In 11 minutes. My team is efficient. Soo-jin made a small sound that was not quite a word. Amara looked at him steadily. That's not reassuring. I know. He set the pot down. The question is whether it changes your position. She thought about the supply closet, the granola bar on her desk, the invitation with the embossed lettering. No, she said. Then let's discuss the structure. He placed a folder on the table. Thin, no visible label. The wedding is in 3 weeks. The guest list includes approximately 200 people from the Park family's social network and Marcus Chen's professional circle. Several of those people will be familiar with my face. That means our cover needs to be detailed enough to hold under sustained scrutiny. Amara frowned. Why would they know your face? Because I move in certain circles. He opened the folder and slid a single sheet across to her. This is our cover story. You'll need to memorize the timeline. She looked at the sheet. The story it described was specific. They had met 8 months ago through a mutual connection in New York, during a conference she had actually attended. There was a note in the margin. You mentioned the conference during your conversation with Ms. Yoon on a call 2 weeks ago. The chill again, faster this time. She looked up. You had us under surveillance before I even sat down at that bar. He didn't flinch. You sat down at a bar I frequent. My security protocols are standard. Standard. She repeated the word with a flatness that held a specific quantity of anger. Okay, what circles, Mr. Kang? What circles are you in where 200 wedding guests might recognize you? The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Investment, he said. Private holdings. The details aren't relevant to what we're doing. Soo-jin leaned close to Amara's ear and whispered in Korean, fast and low. Min-jae heard it. Amara could tell from the slight shift of his attention. He said nothing. She wants to know if you're dangerous, Amara said. Everyone in the room she's describing is dangerous in some way, Min-jae said, looking at Soo-jin directly. The question worth asking is whether I'm dangerous to Amara, and the answer to that is no. Soo-jin looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a woman whose instincts were in direct conflict with each other. Then she picked up her tea. I need to know what he actually does, she told Amara in English, deliberate enough that Min-jae would follow it. Before this goes any further. That's fair, Amara said. Min-jae looked at Amara. I told you there would be details we discuss as we go. She's not just my logistics contact, Amara said. She's my person here. If she's not in, I'm not in. Something shifted in him, not visible in his face, but somewhere in the configuration of his posture, a recalculation. I manage significant assets across several industries, he said finally. Some of those industries operate outside what most people would consider conventional business channels. He paused. That's as specific as I will be at this table. The room was quiet. Outside conventional channels, Amara said slowly. Yes. She put the sheet down. Are you a criminal? He looked at her without blinking. By certain legal definitions, he said, yes. The word landed on the table like something dropped from a height. Amara's chest did a slow, terrible thing. Soojin set her teacup down with a sound that was too loud for the room. You need to be more specific than that, Amara said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. No, he said, I don't. What I need is your decision about whether you proceed with this arrangement or end it here. He folded his hands on the table. I'll respect either answer, but I won't negotiate my disclosure in exchange for your participation. Those are different transactions. Amara stared at him. The thing was, she had known. She hadn't known the word for it, and she hadn't let herself follow the knowing all the way to its conclusion, but the way the crowd had parted. The way his assistant had produced Soojin's name in under 11 minutes. The private number. The room without a sign. The folder with the surveillance note in the margin. She had sat at that bar last night and made a decision about something she didn't fully understand, and here he was, across the table, telling her that the thing she'd half understood was real. Give me the room, she said to Soojin. Amara, 5 minutes, please. Soojin looked at Min-jae with an expression that communicated, with precision and without words, the exact nature of the consequences she held him responsible for if anything went wrong. Then she left. Amara and Min-jae sat across from each other in the private room with the tea going cold between them. You should have told me last, she said. Last night you had 4 drinks and a plan built on desperation, he said. Today you're sober and you've slept. This is the better conversation. She hated that he was right. What am I getting into? A 3-week arrangement with a defined endpoint, he said. You attend the wedding on my arm. We perform a convincing relationship for the duration. You get what you came to Seoul for. At the end, we part ways cleanly. And the risk to me? He considered the question with the same seriousness he seemed to bring to everything. Low, he said. My presence is generally a deterrent rather than a magnet for trouble in social settings. You would be under protection for the entire duration. I don't want to need protection. Most people don't, he said. They need it anyway. She pressed her thumb against her grandmother's ring under the table where he couldn't see. She thought about Marcus saying, I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months in that flat, managed voice. She thought about walking back down the aisle in the wrong direction while 200 people watched and said nothing. What do you get out of this? She asked. Actually, not a vague answer. He was quiet for a moment. The wedding guest list includes 3 people I have business with, he said. Having a companion changes the nature of how those conversations can occur. I'm a cover for you too. Yes, she exhaled. So we're using each other. We're in agreement about what we each need, he said. That's cleaner than most arrangements. She looked at him across the table. This man who had said yes to her ridiculous proposal without asking why she needed it, who had known her friend's name before she said it, who had told her the truth when she pushed, even though the truth was the version that could make her walk out. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks. And then it's done. Completely. She picked up the cover story sheet and read the timeline again. It was well constructed. The conference in New York was real. She had the photos on her phone. The mutual connection was vague enough to resist verification. The story had the texture of something that could survive a dinner table conversation from people who were half paying attention. You're going to have to teach me things, she said. I don't move in rooms like yours. People will notice. I know, he said. That's the next 3 weeks. She looked up. Starting when? Today. The first lesson was not what she expected. She had expected. She wasn't sure exactly. Protocol, maybe? Etiquette. Which fork? How to receive a business card with both hands. The kind of performance coaching that assumed she needed to become a different person. Instead, Minjai took her to a gallery in Itaewon. Not a famous one, a small commercial space with a show of contemporary Korean painting, and told her to walk through it like she owned the building. "I don't know anything about this art," she said. "Doesn't matter. People will ask. People ask questions in social settings to create connection, not to test knowledge," he said. "When someone asks what you think of a painting, they're not requesting an analysis. They're creating an opening. You give them one sentence and you ask them a question back." She stood in front of a large canvas, dark blues, a figure that might have been a person or might have been a tree, and tried to understand what he was telling her. "One sentence," she said. "One strong one." She looked at the painting. "It makes me think of waiting for something that isn't coming." He looked at the painting, then at her. "Yes," he said. "That's it. That's the sentence. That was easy." "Most of it is easier than you think," he said. "The difficulty is that you're used to being in rooms where you have to justify your presence. In those rooms, you don't. I need you to stop explaining yourself before anyone asks you to." She turned to look at him. "How do you know I do that?" "Because you introduced yourself last night as a second-grade teacher," he said, "before I asked you anything about who you were. You pre-explained yourself." The truth of it was uncomfortable. "It's a reflex," she said. "I know. We're going to work on it." They walked through the gallery for 2 hours. He corrected her 3 times. Once for apologizing when she bumped into a display stand, once for qualifying an opinion she offered with, "I might be wrong," but once for smiling at a gallery assistant who hadn't acknowledged her yet. "You're asking for permission to be here," he said, after the 3rd time. "You don't need it." He said it without impatience. That was the thing she kept noticing. He had no interest in making her feel bad about the correction, only in making sure she understood it. There was something almost technical about his attention, like he was debugging a system that fundamentally worked and only needed specific adjustments. On the walk back to the car, she asked, "Did someone teach you this? Or did you have to figure it out?" He was quiet for a beat. "I was taught what a room expects from the person with the least power in it," he said. "Then I spent a long time learning to occupy the position of the person with the most." He paused. "The gap between those two positions is mostly performance." "That's a depressing way to describe it." "It's an accurate one. I don't want to be performing," she said. "I want to actually feel like I belong there." He glanced at her sidelong. "Those aren't different things," he said. Feeling it comes from doing it. You don't feel it first and then act. You act and your nervous system catches up." She thought about that on the ride back and didn't have an argument for it. The second week was harder. Minjae arranged dinners, 3 of them at different restaurants, with different configurations of people. Twice with business associates who spoke mostly Korean and regarded Amara with the careful neutrality of people who had learned not to express surprise. Once with a small group that included 2 Americans and a French woman who worked in fashion and had opinions about everything. Each time, Minjae was at her side, but rarely adjacent. He would position himself across the table or at the other end of the room and watch. She hated it and understood why he did it. She made mistakes. She over-explained twice. She let a man named Park Tae-soo talk at her for 20 minutes about a business venture she had no context for because she couldn't find a natural exit point, and when she finally extracted herself, Minjae appeared at her elbow with a glass of water and said quietly, "You waited for permission to leave that conversation." He wasn't finished. "You were. It's rude to—" "He wasn't concerned about your time. You don't need to be concerned about his." She took the water and drank half of it and didn't answer because she was annoyed and because he was again correct. Later that night, she was staying at Soo-jin's apartment, not at Minjae's residence, a boundary she had established, and he had respected without comment. She lay on the pull-out couch and stared at the ceiling and thought about what she was learning. It wasn't elegance exactly. It wasn't the performance she had anticipated. It was more like he was systematically identifying every habit she had developed to make herself smaller and pointing to them one by one with the same expression a doctor uses when they locate a problem that has been there longer than you realized and could have been addressed sooner. She didn't know how to feel about it. She was grateful, and she was unsettled, and she missed her classroom and her students and the particular simplicity of a life in which she knew exactly who she was and what she was for. She fell asleep holding her grandmother's ring. On the 9th day, Min-jae's world came to find them. She had arrived at his office building, a tower in Gangnam she had been to twice before for meetings she now understood were as much about him watching how she handled herself as they were about anything substantive, and she was in the lobby when she heard the raised voice. Not loud, but raised. The particular register of controlled anger from someone who was trying to keep it controlled and not entirely succeeding. She turned. Across the lobby, near the elevator bank, Min-jae was standing with a man she hadn't seen before. The man was older, mid-50s, with the bearing of someone who had once been powerful and now carried the specific bitterness of a person whose power has changed hands. He was speaking in Korean, rapid and low, and Min-jae was listening with an expression Amara had not seen before. Not still. Still was his default, his resting state. This was something different. This was a stillness with heat behind it, the kind that exists because the alternative is something that cannot happen in a lobby. She didn't move. One of Min-jae's men materialized at her side. She had learned to notice them, these quiet figures that inhabited the edges of every room he occupied, and said, in careful English, "Ms. Brooks, perhaps you'd like to wait upstairs." "I'm fine here," she said. The man across the lobby jabbed a finger toward the floor. Min-jae said 4 words in Korean that she did not understand, and the temperature in the lobby dropped by a perceptible degree. Every person in the space who was paying any attention suddenly found something else to look at. The older man stared at Min-jae for a long moment with the kind of naked, complex emotion that you don't produce for a stranger. Then he turned and walked toward the exit with the deliberate pace of someone who knows that leaving is not winning but is the only available option. Min-jae turned and crossed the lobby toward Amara. His face had returned to its ordinary configuration. If she hadn't seen the previous 30 seconds, she would have read him as calm. "Who was that?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He pressed the elevator button. "Someone from a previous chapter," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She studied his profile as the elevator doors opened. "He wasn't afraid of you," she said. "Most people are afraid of you." He was angry. Min-jae stepped into the elevator. She followed. The doors closed. "He was my brother's associate," Min-jae said. "He came to deliver a message." "What message?" He looked at the floor numbers ascending. "That my brother is aware of the wedding," he said, "and that my brother would prefer I not attend." The weight of it settled over the small elevator space. "Your brother," she said. "Is he the reason you agreed to this in the first place?" He didn't answer. "Min-jae." He looked at her. In the direct light of the elevator, without the calibrated dimness of restaurants and galleries and bars, she could see the specific quality of exhaustion he carried. Not physical, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes from carrying something for years that was put on you by someone else and that you could not set down. "My brother is the reason for most things," he said. She wanted to ask more and understood from the way he said it that this was not the moment. So she didn't. She filed it into the accumulation of things she was learning about this man that she hadn't expected to need to know. On the 11th day, she saw what he actually was. Not heard about it. Not inferred it from behavior and careful non-answers. Saw it, with her own eyes, in the back room of a restaurant in Mapogu because she had gone looking for a bathroom and taken the wrong corridor and opened a door she shouldn't have opened. There were 4 men in the room. 3 of them were standing. One of them was seated in a chair with his wrists zip-tied to the armrests and blood coming from a cut above his eye, and Min-jae was crouching in front of him at eye level, speaking very quietly, and the quality of what Amara saw on the faces of every man in that room, including the one in the chair, was not anger or pain but fear. A specific, knowing fear. The kind that understands exactly where it is and what is possible. Min-jae turned his head. He saw her. The corridor and the room existed in a single horrible moment of eye contact. She stepped back. The door swung shut on its own mechanism. She stood in the corridor with her hand against the wall, and her breath doing something wrong in her chest and her brain scrambling to organize what she had just seen into something she could hold. The door opened again. Min-jae stepped out and pulled it closed behind him. They stood in the corridor. The sound from the restaurant, conversation, dishes, a television, floated from somewhere above them. "You should not have come down this hallway," he said. I know. Her voice was thin. She hated that it was thin. Are you all right? What is happening in that room? An internal matter, he said. There is a man with blood on his face tied to a chair. Yes. Is he going to… She couldn't finish it. He will be released, Minjae said. When he provides information he is currently declining to provide. He will not be killed. She looked at him. How do I know that's true? Because I'm telling you, he said, and because it would be bad for business. She laughed, a short, involuntary sound that had nothing to do with anything being funny. Bad for business, she repeated. Amara. He said her name without the formal prefix for the first time, and the change in register was small but distinct. I told you what I was. I didn't hide it. You said outside conventional channels. That's… She gestured at the door. That's not the same thing as what I just saw. No, he said. It's not. He stood in front of her in a corridor that smelled like food and floor cleaner, and he did not try to minimize it or reframe it or apologize for it. He looked at her with the same direct attention he brought to everything, and he waited. She thought, I could leave. He told me on the first day that I could leave whenever I chose, and that if I chose to stay, it was my choice. He is not blocking the corridor. He is not touching her. He is waiting. She thought about the gallery in Itaewon, and the way he'd said you don't need permission to be here. She thought about the elevator and the exhaustion behind his eyes, and the 4 words he'd said in the lobby that made the temperature drop. She thought about her grandmother's ring and what it meant to be a woman who does not give up the things that matter. Go back in there, she said. He looked at her. Finish whatever you're doing, she said, and when you're done, I want you to tell me about your brother. His face moved in a way she hadn't seen before, brief, unguarded, gone, before she could fully read it. All right, he said. He went back through the door. She walked back up the corridor toward the restaurant noise and sat at the table they'd been sharing and drank her water and watched her own hands until they were steady. She had every reason to get up and leave, and she did not get up and leave, and she knew, sitting at that table in the restaurant in Mapogu, that this was the moment she was choosing to stay, not the moment at the bar when she had put her grandmother's ring on the counter, not the breakfast meeting, not the gallery. This moment, with full information. And she knew, with the same certainty that had lived below logic since the first night, that whatever came next would cost her something real. Not in danger, but in the simpler and more permanent way that all real choices cost something, because they close off the version of yourself that didn't make them. 2 hours later, Minjae sat across from her at a different table in a different room and told her about his brother. His name was Kang Seong-jae, 11 years older. The one who had built the organization before Minjae was old enough to understand what it was. When Minjae was 22 and had just finished his business degree in London, Seong-jae had called him back to Seoul with a specific ask. Come home. I need someone I trust at my side. There's a business opportunity in the Hong Kong channel that requires someone who speaks English and understands Western finance and has a clean record. He had the clean record because his brother had kept him out of everything. He understood this later. At 22, he understood it as protection. It was a setup, he said. What kind of setup? The Hong Kong channel went wrong. Not by accident. It was designed to go wrong. The people whose money was involved came looking for accountability. He looked at his water glass. Seong-jae provided them with mine. He framed you, she said. He restructured the situation so that I was the responsible party, Minjae said. And then he used the situation to leverage my participation in the organization at a level I had previously not been involved with. A pause. Either I became useful to him in a specific way, or I went to prison for financial crimes I had not committed. How old were you? 23. She sat with that for a moment. And now you run the whole thing. It took time, he said. Does he know you're coming for him? He looked at her directly. He's known for years, he said. It's the nature of the relationship. He watches what I build. I watch what he still holds. He paused. The wedding is attended by 3 of his key associates. If I attend, if I'm seen as stable, established, the kind of man who brings a partner to a social event, it changes a calculation that has been suspended for a long time. She understood. I'm not just a date, she said. I'm a signal. Yes. You're telling your brother you're ready. He said nothing. Minjai. She leaned forward slightly. Is it safe for me to be at that wedding? He met her eyes. I will not let anything happen to you, he said. That is not a performance. It is not part of the arrangement. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, Soul was doing what Soul did. Loud, lit, indifferent to the specific weight of any one conversation happening inside it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. It was not an agreement so much as an arrival. Both of them at the same place by different roads, in the full knowledge that the road ahead had no clean exits left, only the thing at the end of it, whatever that turned out to be. The point of no return, Amara would later understand, is never a dramatic moment. It's the moment after the moment, the quiet one where you've already made the decision and your body is simply catching up to where your heart already went. She was already there. The morning of the wedding arrived the way bad things often do, quietly, with good weather. Seoul put on a clear sky and mild air, the kind of late spring morning that made the city look like a promise, rather than a place where things actually happened to actual people. Amara stood at Sujin's window at 6:30 and watched the light come up over the rooftops and felt the specific quality of stillness that precedes something you cannot take back. She had slept 4 hours. Not because she was afraid of the wedding, she had moved past fear of Marcus somewhere around day 8 of the training, when she'd realized that the emotion she'd been calling grief was actually something closer to anger that hadn't found its shape yet. She hadn't slept because of what Minjae had told her the night before. His brother would be at the wedding, not as a guest of the Park family. As a business associate of Marcus Chen's new father-in-law, Park Hyun-soo, whose construction empire had tentacles in 6 industries and whose social network included, apparently, every powerful man in Seoul, regardless of how they had acquired their power. Minjae had mentioned it with the controlled neutrality he used for information he had already made his peace with, but Amara had seen his jaw tighten for exactly 2 seconds before he smoothed it out. 2 seconds was a long time for him. She dressed carefully. The dress was deep burgundy, fitted but not restrictive, chosen 3 days ago with Minjae present. He had looked at the 3 options she showed him and pointed to the burgundy without deliberation and said that one makes you look like someone who arrived first. She hadn't entirely understood the distinction, but she trusted his read on the room they were walking into. Her grandmother's ring on her right hand, a simple gold bracelet on her left wrist that Sujin had lent her. Her hair pulled back in a way that had taken 40 minutes and looked like it had taken 5. Sujin stood in the doorway of the bathroom, watching her with the expression of someone who has been worried for 2 weeks and has run out of new ways to express it. You don't have to go, she said. I know. He's going to be there, Marcus, with her, at their wedding. You'll have to watch the whole... Sujin. I'm just saying it out loud so you've heard it said out loud. Amara looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the woman who had walked down an aisle in Atlanta 3 weeks ago with a practiced smile and a dress she'd spent 4 months paying off. That woman had been braced against something she didn't yet know was coming. This woman knew exactly what the room contained and was walking toward it anyway. I've heard it, she said. Let's go. Minjae's car was outside at 8 sharp. He was already in it. He looked at her when she got in with the brief, total attention he brought to everything, and she saw his eyes move from her face to the dress to her hands and back to her face. Good, he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an assessment that had landed in her favor, which from him was worth more than a compliment. Your brother, she said as the car moved into traffic. How do we handle it? We don't acknowledge him unless he approaches, Minjae said. If he approaches, you stay at my side and you say nothing. You don't need to perform anything in that interaction. Your only job is to be present. Just stand there. Standing next to me is not a small thing in that room, he said. You don't need to speak for it to register. She understood what he meant. She had watched him enter 3 different rooms over the past 2 weeks, and she had seen, each time, how the room reorganized itself around his presence. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way water reorganizes around a stone. The people who knew who he was found reasons to be near him, or reasons to be away from him, and both of those movements said the same thing. Are you ready? She asked. He looked out the window at the city moving past. Yes, he said. And then, after a beat, Are you? She thought about it honestly. I don't know, she said. But I'm going. He nodded like that was the right answer. The venue was a tower hotel in Gangnam, whose ballroom occupied the top 3 floors, and whose lobby had been transformed with white flowers and the specific cold perfume of money spent in quantities large enough that the spending itself becomes the point. There were staff everywhere, not the visible, helpful kind, but the invisible kind, the ones who materialize exactly when something is needed and disappear before you fully registered their presence. The guests were already gathering in the pre-reception area when they arrived. Amara felt the shift in the room before she could identify its source. A change in the noise level, a redirect of attention, the kind of collective reorientation that happens when something enters a space that the space wasn't entirely expecting. She kept her shoulders back. She did not explain herself to anyone. Min-jae's hand rested at the small of her back. Light, barely there, just enough pressure to communicate together without communicating anything else. She had noticed over the past week that he only touched her in public when it served the performance, and that when he did, it was always precise, never excessive, never casual. She spotted Marcus across the room before he saw her. He was standing with a group of men in suits, holding a champagne flute, wearing the expression of a man who was performing relaxed confidence and doing it well enough that most people would believe it. He had put on some weight around his jaw. His haircut was new and looked expensive. He looked, in the most specific way, like a man who had made a decision and was invested in appearing certain it was the right one. Amara looked at him and felt she catalogued it carefully, in the moment, not pain, not the sharp grabbing thing she had expected, something more like recognition. The specific recognition of seeing, in full clarity, the version of a person you had constructed in your mind versus the actual human standing in a room, and understanding that the gap between those two things was the truest measure of how far you had been in love with a story rather than a man. Then Marcus looked up. The sequence of his reactions lasted perhaps 4 seconds and was more honest than anything he had said to her in the last year of their relationship. First, recognition. Second, a blink of something that was either shock or guilt or both. Third, his eyes moved to Min-jae at her side and stayed there. Fourth, he looked back at Amara with an expression she couldn't fully read because she had never seen it on his face before. It might have been regret. It might have been the particular discomfort of a man who has convinced himself he made a rational decision and is suddenly looking at evidence that the calculation was wrong. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked away. Not quickly, deliberately, at her own pace, in her own time, the way you look away from something that no longer requires your attention. She felt Min-jae's hand apply the faintest additional pressure at her back. They moved through the room. The first hour was social architecture, so moving through conversations, being seen in the right configurations with the right people. Min-jae was precise about it in a way that looked effortless from the outside. He would position them near a group, wait for a natural entry point in the conversation, and introduce Amara with a phrasing she had noticed he used consistently. Amara Brooks, from Atlanta. She teaches at the elementary school level, which requires more discipline than most of what we do. It was a disarming construction. It made people laugh. It positioned her as someone capable of managing something genuinely difficult, in a room full of people who manage difficult things for a living and like to be reminded of the fact. She stopped pre-explaining herself. She let silences sit for a beat longer than was comfortable and found that people rushed to fill them in her favor. She realized somewhere in the middle of the second conversation, actually doing it. Then she saw him. Kang Seong-jae. She recognized him from no photograph. Min-jae had shown her none, but she would have known him by the way Min-jae's body changed when Seong-jae entered the room. Not a visible change, not something anyone else would notice. But the hand at her back became very slightly more present, and the quality of Min-jae's attention shifted from the room in general to a specific point across it, and she followed that point and found a man who looked like Min-jae the way a blurred copy looks like an original. Seong-jae was heavier, older, with the same bone structure, but carrying it differently. Where Min-jae was contained, Seong-jae was expansive. He moved through the room with the air of a man who owned the floor he walked on and wanted you to notice that he noticed you noticing. He was laughing at something when he entered, and the laugh was large and social and performed, and Amara thought, they have nothing in common. And then she thought, that's not true. They have everything in common, and one of them has spent years trying to put distance between himself and that fact. Seong-jae's eyes found Min-jae across the room. The smile didn't drop. That was what made it terrible, sis. The smile stayed exactly in place, maintained with the precision of something that had been practiced until it became automatic. And above it, his eyes delivered something that had no warmth in it at all. Min-jae looked back at him with nothing on his face. "Don't react," Min-jae said quietly, near her ear. "I'm not reacting. Whatever he does, don't react." She had 4 seconds to wonder what whatever he does might encompass before Seong-jae changed direction and moved toward them. He spoke Korean when he arrived. Fast, social, addressed to Min-jae, but with his eyes flicking to Amara at intervals that were calibrated to make her aware she was being assessed. Min-jae responded in Korean. The exchange lasted 40 seconds, and its surface texture was pleasant, a greeting between brothers at a mutual acquaintance's wedding. And its actual content was something Amara could not follow linguistically, but could read in the architecture of the two men's bodies, the way you read a weather system by the way the trees are moving. Then Seong-jae switched to English. "Amara Brooks," he said, with her name in his mouth like he'd had it prepared. "Atlanta. Min-jae mentioned you." A pause precisely timed. "Though not recently." "He mentioned you too," she said. "Also not recently." Something flickered in Seong-jae's face. Amusement, maybe, or the recognition of a move he hadn't anticipated. "You teach children," he said. "Second grade." "That's brave work." The social warmth of it was so perfectly calibrated that from across the room it would read as genuine. "I have enormous respect for educators. They shape everything that comes after." He looked at Min-jae. "Don't you think, little brother? The things you learn early are the ones that stay." Min-jae said nothing. "I hope you enjoy the wedding, Ms. Brooks," Seong-jae said. He let his eyes rest on her grandmother's ring for exactly 1 second. She caught the movement. And then he smiled and moved away into the crowd with the fluid ease of a man who has just made a point he doesn't need to explain. She exhaled. "What did he say?" she asked. In Korean. "Nothing that matters." Min-jae. A beat. "He said the ring on your hand is interesting," he said, "and that you look like a woman who doesn't know what she's standing next to." The cold of it moved through her slowly. "He was talking about you." "Yes." "He's trying to rattle me." "Yes." She straightened her shoulders. "It didn't work." He looked at her sidelong. "I know," he said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, brief, private, almost careful, like he was saying something he hadn't intended to say out loud. The ceremony began at noon. Amara sat beside Min-jae in the 3rd row and watched Marcus Chen marry Ji Yeon Park in a ceremony that was beautiful in the specific way of things that have had enormous amounts of money spent on them, and she felt, still cataloging, still careful with her own interior, the last of something dissolve. Not dramatically, not with tears. The way a knot releases when the tension that was holding it finally, after a long time, goes out of the rope. She was done with Marcus Chen. She had known it intellectually for days. She knew it in her body now. She glanced at Min-jae beside her. He was watching the ceremony with the same contained attention he brought to everything, and she thought about what he'd told her in the restaurant, 23 years old, and handed a crime he hadn't committed, and given a choice that wasn't a choice. She thought about what it cost, over years, to turn that into what he had become. Not the power, the control. The absolute, unrelenting self-governance of a man who had learned that losing control even once in front of the wrong person could end everything. She thought, I am sitting next to someone who has never had the option of being ordinary, and I came here trying to get back to ordinary. And somewhere in the last 2 weeks, those two trajectories had found each other, and she did not know yet what that meant. Then her phone vibrated. She wouldn't have checked it. She had learned from Min-jae's coaching the specific social cost of checking your phone during a ceremony. But it vibrated twice more in rapid succession, and then a 4th time, and the pattern of it was wrong enough that she glanced at the screen. Destiny. 5 messages. The preview of the first one read, Amara, I need you to call me right now. It's about Marcus. I found something, and you need to know before... She looked at the next. You do anything at that wedding, please call me the 3rd, his company, Amara, the school funding, Please call. She felt the cold differently this time. Not the social cold of Seong-jae's assessment, but something deeper and more personal that started in her stomach. The school funding. She taught at Bright Futures Elementary in Atlanta, a Title A school in a neighborhood where the budget never covered everything it was supposed to cover. 18 months ago, a private grant had come through, significant, enough to fund the arts program, and 2 additional teaching positions for 3 years. The foundation that issued it was called the MCB Education Initiative. She had been on the committee that received it. She had written part of the thank you letter. MCB, Marcus Chen Brooks. Her name was in that foundation title. She had thought, when she'd seen it at the time, she had felt a warmth at it, had thought it was a gesture, something he'd done quietly because he knew how much the school meant to her. She had never asked him about it directly because it had felt like the kind of thing you don't make someone explain. MCB Education Initiative. She looked at the altar where Marcus was saying his vows. She stepped out of the row carefully, murmuring an apology to the person on her left, and slipped out the side door of the ballroom into the corridor before Min-jae could follow. She called Destiny. Destiny answered before the first ring finished. Thank God. Okay. Listen. Tell me. I was doing your taxes. You gave me access to the grant documents last year, remember? For the nonprofit filing? Destiny's voice had the specific texture of controlled urgency. She was a paralegal, and when she got this tone, it meant she had found something with an edge on it. I was cross-referencing the MCB Foundation documentation, and I found a secondary registration. Amara, the foundation, is registered in Seoul. Seoul? It's a Korean legal entity, and the primary registered officer, a pause. It's not Marcus. Amara's hand tightened on the phone. The primary registered officer is a holding company called KMJ Partners, Destiny said. I did another 3 hours of digging, and KMJ Partners is... Min-jae, Amara said, silence on the line. You knew? Destiny said. I didn't know. She was standing in a corridor with the sound of wedding vows coming through the closed ballroom door and the city visible through a floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the hall, and her brain was doing the thing it does when a structure you trusted reveals a flaw that was there from the beginning. The grant. It came through 18 months ago. Yes. Min-jae and Marcus knew each other 18 months ago. It looks that way. She pressed her back against the wall. The timeline was reorganizing itself. 18 months ago, Min-jae had funded a grant attached to her school. The grant had her name embedded in the foundation title. Either Marcus had used Min-jae's money to make a gesture toward her without telling her where the money came from, or Min-jae had known about her before the bar. Destiny, she said, I need you to find out when the foundation was registered. Keyboard sounds. 19 months ago, Destiny said. 19 months ago, Amara had been dating Marcus Chen. She had been teaching at Bright Futures. She had been a person who had no conceivable reason to be on the radar of a Korean crime organization. Unless she had been on Marcus's radar, and Marcus had been on Min-jae's, and somewhere in the overlap of those two circles she had existed as... what? A variable. A person whose proximity to Marcus was noted and filed. A school that could be funded as a gesture that kept Marcus cooperative. She ended the call. She stood in the corridor for 30 seconds, not moving, letting the full shape of it arrive. Then the ballroom door opened and Min-jae stepped into the corridor. He saw her face. Whatever he had been about to say, he didn't say it. How long have you known about me? She asked. The quality of his stillness changed. Amara, how long? He looked at her with the direct, unblinking attention she had come to know, and she watched him make a decision about honesty in real time, watched him arrive at it and commit to it the way you commit to something that is going to cost you. 14 months, he said. The number landed. She had been ready for it, and it landed anyway, with the specific weight of something true. You knew who I was when I sat down at that bar. Yes. The bar you frequent, that you frequent. Yes. You'd been watching Marcus's life for over a year, which means you'd been watching everyone connected to Marcus, which means... She stopped because her voice was doing something she didn't want it to do. She breathed. The grant, the MCB Foundation. Was that you? A pause of exactly the wrong length. The foundation was structured by Marcus, he said. The capital came through one of my holding entities. Marcus requested it as part of an arrangement between us. He paused. He told me it was for someone he was building a future with. He used your money to make me think he was generous. Yes, and you let him. At the time, your school needed the funding and Marcus's motivations were his own problem, Minjae said. I didn't know who you were specifically. Not at first. You were a name in a document. And then? A beat. And then I knew more. She looked at him. The corridor was empty. The city was behind him through the glass. Lit and enormous and entirely indifferent. He stood in front of her in his precise dark suit, and he did not flinch, and he did not move, and he did not try to soften any of it. And she thought, this is what he does. He tells the truth when you push hard enough, and he delivers it cleanly and without decoration, and he stands in the rubble of it and waits. Why did you agree when I asked you at the bar? She said. The real reason. Not the thing about your brother's associates at the wedding. He was quiet for 5 seconds. Because I wanted to, he said. That's not specific enough. Because when you put that ring on the bar and looked at me like I was someone who could be trusted with something that mattered to you, he said. I wanted to be that. That it hit her in a place she hadn't been protecting. That doesn't fix what you just told me, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. She looked at her grandmother's ring. 19 months ago, a foundation with her name embedded in its title had funded her school with money that came from this man, routed through the ex-fiancé who would leave her at the altar 7 months later. And this man had been at a bar she had walked into by accident and had agreed to her proposal and had taught her things she needed to know and had told her the truth about what he was in a restaurant corridor and had sat across from her in a private room and told her about his brother with the exhausted honesty of someone who doesn't show that particular wound to many people. None of that was clean. None of it resolved into something she could file neatly. She looked up at him. Did Marcus know you'd be at this wedding? Something crossed Minjae's face. He knew I was in Seoul, he said carefully. Did he know specifically that you would be here today? The pause this time was different. Not a pause of choosing honesty. A pause of something she hadn't seen on his face before. Something that looked briefly and uncomfortably like it was at the edge of its own control. The invitation you received, he said slowly. She waited. It was sent from Marcus's account, he said, but the save the date was generated from a guest management system. He stopped. Who has access to that system? She asked, and she already knew from the quality of his silence that she was not going to like the answer. The Park family's event coordinator, he said, and Park Hyun-soo's office. A pause. My brother has a relationship with Park Hyun-soo that predates the wedding by several years. The shape of it arrived all at once, the way the full geometry of a thing sometimes only becomes visible from a sufficient distance. Your brother sent me the invitation, she said. Minjae said nothing. He knew that I would come to Seoul. He knew that if I came to Seoul, there was a possibility I would encounter you, and he... She stopped. The room without a sign. The bar Minjae frequented. The efficiency of his team in identifying Soo-jin's name in 11 minutes. Did he arrange the bar? I don't know, Minjae said. That's the first time you've said that. I know, she breathed. In and out. The ceremony was still happening behind the closed door. She could hear it faintly. The officiant's voice. The particular hush of a room full of people watching a formal thing. She had come to this city to walk into a room with her head up and prove to herself that she was past the worst thing that had happened to her in years, and she had ended up inside a structure she hadn't built and couldn't yet see all the walls of. If your brother arranged this, she said, if he put me in that bar on purpose, what does he want from it? Minjae's jaw was tight. He wants leverage, he said. He wants something he can use. If I'm attached to someone, if there's someone who matters, that's a point of pressure he didn't have before. I'm bait, she said. I was bait from the beginning. Potentially. Potentially. She looked at him with something that was moving toward anger but hadn't finished arriving. I came to you. I chose this. He couldn't have planned the specific conversation at the bar. No, Minjae said. He couldn't have planned that. So what is he counting on? That I would want this to be real, he said quietly. The corridor was very still. She looked at Kong Min-jae, this man who had told her the truth even when it would cost him, who had not taken her grandmother's ring. who had stood in a restaurant corridor and waited for her to decide whether to leave and had not tried to influence the decision. And she thought about what it means to be used by someone you trusted and what it means to be used by someone who, in the middle of using you, discovered they didn't want to anymore. Those were not the same thing. They were also not entirely different things. "The wedding is still happening in that room," she said. "Yes." "Your brother is in that room." "Yes." "If we walk back in there together, right now, knowing what we know—" She stopped. "It changes what this means. It's not a performance anymore. We'd be walking into a room with your brother watching, knowing that he set this in motion, and choosing to do it anyway." He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "That's a different thing than what I agreed to at the bar." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked down the corridor at the city behind the glass. She thought about her grandmother, who had worn a ring for 53 years on the hand of a man she had chosen with full knowledge of his faults, in the full understanding that love was not an absence of complication, but a decision made in the presence of it. She thought, "I could still walk out of this building, take a cab to Sujin's apartment, book an early flight, go back to Atlanta and to the supply closet and the crayon drawings left on her desk, and the ordinary, coherent life she understood." She thought, or. She straightened her shoulders. She turned to face the ballroom door. "Fix your jacket," she said to Min-jae. A pause. He adjusted his jacket. "When we walk back in there," she said, "I need you to understand something. Tell me." "I'm not walking in for Marcus anymore," she said. "And I'm not walking in because your brother arranged it." She looked at him. "I'm walking in because I choose to, and that means from this point forward, whatever happens in that room is real. Not a performance, not an arrangement, real." He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had never seen on his face. Open, unguarded, the face of a man who has been waiting for something without letting himself know he was waiting. "All right," he said. She opened the ballroom door and walked back into the room, and Min-jae walked beside her. And somewhere across the crowd, Kang Seong-jae turned to look at them with his social smile in place and his eyes doing their cold calculation. And what he saw, if he was reading it correctly, was not a woman being used as leverage. What he saw was something he had not planned for. They walked back into the room, and the room noticed. Not loudly, not with any single dramatic shift, but the way a room notices when the temperature changes. A collective, wordless recalibration. Conversations didn't stop, but they adjusted. Eyes moved. The social geography of the space rearranged itself by small degrees around the fact of the two of them walking through it side by side with something different in how they were carrying themselves. Amara felt it. She did not look at Seong-jae. She did not look at Marcus, who was now at the front of the room receiving congratulations with Ji-yeon at his side. She looked at the room the way Min-jae had taught her to look at rooms. Like she had arrived first and everyone else had come to join her. The reception had moved into its main phase. The ballroom was fully lit now, round tables arranged around a central floor, the kind of room designed to make you feel that you are inside a world that runs on entirely different rules from the one you came from. Staff moved in patterns that looked effortless and weren't. A string quartet played from an elevated corner, and the music was tasteful and unobtrusive and cost more per hour than Amara made in a week. Min-jae guided her towards their assigned table without appearing to guide her. She had learned to read his hand at her back as a kind of language, pressure, direction, the occasional brief stillness that meant wait. Their table held 6. 2 of the seats were already occupied by people she recognized from the second week of dinners. A man named Oh Dong-hyun, who ran a shipping logistics firm and who had the placid, unreadable face of someone who had survived 20 years in proximity to dangerous people by mastering the art of having no visible reaction to anything. And his wife, who was small and precise and had assessed Amara in the first 3 seconds of their dinner meeting and apparently found her acceptable. The other 2 seats held people she didn't recognize, a couple, mid-40s, who introduced themselves in English as visitors from Singapore. She sat. She accepted wine. She engaged the Singapore couple in conversation about the city with the specific focus of someone who understands that the conversation is not really about the city. Min-jae sat beside her and she felt, in the new geometry of what existed between them, the difference in how he occupied the space. Not more relaxed. He was not a man who became relaxed, but more present, less managed, as if something he had been holding carefully at a distance had been granted permission to move closer. 20 minutes into the reception, Seong-jae made his move. She didn't see him approach. She heard his voice, warm, social, landing on the table with the force of someone who has calculated exactly how much disruption he can introduce into a setting before crossing the line of what the setting tolerates. He spoke Korean to Min-jae first, 14 seconds. Then he looked at Amara and switched to English with a smile that was so well constructed she would have believed it if she hadn't already seen what lived behind it. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "I wanted to come introduce myself properly. I'm afraid our earlier conversation was too brief." "It was enough," she said. The Singapore couple had gone quiet. Oh Dong-hyun had done nothing visible except become slightly more still, which she had learned to recognize as the equivalent of a man pressing himself against a wall. Seong-jae pulled out the empty chair across from Amara and sat without being invited. He rested his forearms on the table in the way of a man who understands that occupying space is a form of claim. "You know," he said conversationally, looking at her ring, "my grandmother had a ring like that, very old, rose gold." He tilted his head. "There's something extraordinary about a woman who holds on to things. There's something extraordinary about a man who pays attention to women's jewelry," Amara said. The Singapore couple exchanged a glance. Seong-jae laughed. Genuine this time, or at least more genuine than anything else he'd produced. "I like her," he said to Min-jae in English. "I understand now." "Seong-jae," Min-jae's voice had the temperature of February concrete. "This isn't the venue." "Every venue is a venue," Seong-jae said. "That's the thing you keep forgetting. You compartmentalize. You separate the professional from the personal, the public from the private." He picked up an unused fork from the table and turned it between his fingers, not looking at it, looking at Min-jae. "It makes you easier to plan around." "Put the fork down," Min-jae said. Seong-jae put it down. Not because Min-jae had told him to. The performance of compliance was its own kind of aggression. "I just wanted to spend a moment with the woman my little brother brought to a wedding," he said. "Is that not allowed? We're family." "What do you want?" Min-jae said. "A conversation. Later. Tonight." Seong-jae looked at Amara with the smile still fully deployed. "I'm sure Ms. Brooks understands that some things require privacy." "Ms. Brooks is staying with me," Min-jae said. "Of course she is." He stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. "Enjoy the reception." He looked at Amara one last time. It was a genuine pleasure. He walked back into the room and was absorbed by it, returning to the social circulation of the event with the ease of water returning to its level. Amara let out a breath that she'd been holding in her chest for the last 3 minutes without noticing. "He's going to escalate," she said quietly. "Yes," Min-jae said. "Tonight?" "Before tonight." She looked at him. I was watching the room with a quality of attention that had shifted, sharper, more specific, the way a thing sharpens when it's moved from background to foreground. She had seen this in the corridor outside the restaurant in Mapogu. She understood what it meant. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. He looked at her, and something in the look was brief and unguarded, and then contained again. "Stay close," he said. "And if I say leave, you leave." "We talked about that condition." "I know." A pause. "I'm asking." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. The next 40 minutes were the eye of it, the false calm that precedes the thing that actually happens. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. Marcus gave a toast to his new wife that was eloquent and well-paced, and that Amara listened to from across the room with the total emotional distance of someone who has already completed their relationship with a particular chapter of their life and is simply waiting for the book to acknowledge the fact. She caught Marcus looking at her twice during the toast. The second time she was looking back, and she held it for a beat and then looked at Min-jae beside her, and whatever Marcus saw in that sequence was enough to make him lose the next sentence and recover it with a visible effort that 3 people at the nearby tables noticed. She didn't mean it as a performance. That was the thing. She looked at Min-jae because she wanted to, and Marcus happened to be in the line of sight. Then Min-jae's phone vibrated. He looked at it under the table. She saw his jaw tighten. The 2-second tell, the one she'd learned to read. He put the phone away and leaned close to her ear. "There are 4 men in the building who don't belong here," he said quietly. "My team identified them entering through the service entrance 8 minutes ago." Her stomach dropped. Seong Jae's people? No. A pause with weight in it. A rival organization. We've had a pending conflict with them for 6 weeks. Tonight isn't a coincidence. Someone told them you'd be here. He said nothing, which was the answer. She thought Seong Jae told them. She thought his brother had set this entire situation in motion, and now he was going to let someone else light the match and watch what happened from a safe position in the room, deniable, untouchable, present. What do we do? She said. I'm going to stand up in approximately 30 seconds and speak to Oh Dong-hyun, he said. When I do, you're going to excuse yourself to the restroom. One of my men will be in the corridor. He'll take you to a secure holding room on the floor below. I'm not Amara. The particular weight he put into her name had nothing managed about it. There are 200 people in this room. If this goes wrong in here, those 200 people are in the middle of it. I need you out of this room so that I can move without thinking about where you are. She looked at him. In the candlelight of the reception, in the middle of a luxury ballroom with a string quartet playing something baroque and tasteful in a wedding cake being wheeled toward the center of the room, she looked at Kang Min-jae and understood that the thing he'd just said was the most honest thing he'd said to her. I need you out of this room so I can move without thinking about where you are. 30 seconds, she said. Yes. He stood. She watched him lean toward Oh Dong-hyun with the calm ease of a social conversation, and she put her napkin on the table and picked up her small bag and crossed the room toward the exit with the particular gait she had spent 2 weeks learning. Not hurried, not performing calm, just moving. The corridor outside the ballroom was quiet. A man in a dark jacket materialized from a position near the elevator bank. Not the same man as the lobby, but carrying the same quality of contained readiness. He looked at her once and said, "This way, Ms. Brooks," and moved toward the stairwell. She followed him down one flight and into a service corridor and through a door that opened into what appeared to be a small conference room. 2 chairs, a table, a window overlooking the building's internal atrium. The man took a position just inside the door. She sat. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. She pressed her hand flat against the table surface and felt the coolness of it and focused on that. The physical reality of the table, the temperature of the air, the sound of her own breathing, which she regulated deliberately because it was the one thing in this situation she could control. 3 minutes passed. Then she heard it. Not loud. The building was well insulated and they were 1 floor below the ballroom, but distinct enough. A sound like furniture moved fast against a floor. Then voices, raised. Then a sound she identified with the specific sickening clarity of someone who has watched enough of the real world to know it when she hears it. The man at the door straightened. His earpiece crackled with something she couldn't hear. "What's happening?" she said. "Stay seated, Ms. Brooks." "What is happening up there?" He looked at her with the expression of a man executing instructions in direct conflict with his instinct to answer her. "Mr. Kong is managing the situation," he said. "How many of them were there?" A pause. 4 that entered through the service corridor. Potentially 2 more positioned at the main entrance. 6. Against however many of Min-jae's people were in the room. She had counted 3 over the course of the evening, but there were almost certainly more, positioned in ways she hadn't identified. She stood up. "Ms. Brooks, I'm not leaving this floor," she said. "I'm going to stand by that door, and you're going to tell me what's happening every 30 seconds. That's what's going to happen." He looked at her for a moment and then, apparently, made a decision. "There's an altercation in the ballroom's south corridor," he said. 2 of the 4 were intercepted before reaching the main room. The other 2 got through. "Min-jae. He's engaged. He's—" The earpiece crackled again. He listened. Something in his face shifted. "He's in the corridor. There's a problem." "What problem?" "One of the attackers got past the perimeter." "Where?" He looked at her with the expression of a man who does not want to say the next thing he is about to say. "He was heading toward the service stairs," he said. "This floor." The door of the conference room opened before she finished processing what he'd said. She had 2 seconds. The man at the door moved fast, interposing himself, and she stepped back against the far wall, and the table caught her at the back of the thighs. And in those 2 seconds she saw the man in the doorway was not one of Min-jae's people. He was younger, broader, with the specific quality of someone operating on instruction rather than judgment, and he was looking past Min-jae's man directly at her. What happened next took 11 seconds, and she counted them afterward with the precision of someone whose brain had filed the memory in very high resolution. The two men collided in the doorway. Not a clean exchange, brutal, close, the kind of physical conflict that has none of the choreography of what people imagine violence looks like, and all of the ugliness of what it actually is. Minjai's man was skilled, and the attacker was larger, and the door frame was narrow, and it was not going to resolve in her favor in time. She picked up the chair. Not a planned decision, a decision that happened before it was decided, the way certain things do. Her hands found the chair and she moved without the 11-second count having reached 3 yet. And when the attacker pushed Minjai's man sideways into the doorframe and stepped fully into the room, she brought the chair into contact with his right shoulder with everything she had. It wasn't enough to put him down. It was enough to turn him, and in the half-second that he was turned, Minjai's man had his footing back, and what happened in the following 4 seconds she did not watch because she had pressed herself against the wall to the side of the window and was breathing in the controlled, deliberate way that was the only resource she had left. When it was over, the attacker was on the floor, and Minjai's man was breathing hard with his jacket torn at the shoulder and his hand pressed against his side. He looked at her. "Are you—" "I'm fine." Her voice was steady. She was surprised again by how steady. "You're bleeding." "It's manageable." He touched his ear. "Floor 2 is clear. Miss Brooks is unharmed." A pause. "Yes." He looked at her. "Mr. Kang is asking." She exhaled. "Tell him I'm fine." "He wants confirmation from you directly." She almost laughed. "Tell him I hit someone with a chair and I'd like a minute." The man's expression didn't change, but something around his eyes did. "He says to stay on this floor until he comes himself." "I heard him." She sat back down. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she thought, or not only from fear, but from the particular physical aftermath of having done something your body doesn't have a template for. She pressed them flat on the table and breathed. She thought about 200 people in a ballroom upstairs and what was happening to them right now. She thought about Marcus Chen at the altar of his own wedding, looking at her with that flash of regret, with no understanding of what was moving through the walls of his venue. She thought about Seong Jae, who had planned this or enabled this, or at minimum had known it was coming, standing somewhere in that room with his social smile deployed. She thought about Min Jae in a corridor somewhere above her, and she took the thought and held it and set it aside because if she let it become a feeling, she would not be able to stay in the chair. 8 minutes passed. Then the door opened, and it was Min Jae. He was intact. That was her first inventory. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt was torn at the collar, and there was blood on his left forearm. Not a critical volume, but present, dark against the white of the fabric. He was breathing at a rate above his usual. She had never seen him breathe at a rate above his usual. And his face had the quality of something that had been pushed past its ordinary boundaries and not yet fully returned. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You hit someone with a chair," he said. "He was in the way. I told you to stay in the room." "I stayed in the room," she said. "The problem came into the room." He looked at her for a long moment with the blood on his arm and his torn collar and his breathing, not yet steady, and she held his gaze and did not move toward him because she was still sitting with her hands flat on the table, and if she moved, she was going to do something she hadn't decided yet whether to do. "You're not hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." "He didn't touch you." "No, your guy was good. I just added to it." He moved into the room and looked at the man on the floor, who was restrained now, hands secured, and he said something in Korean to his man that she didn't follow, and then he turned back to her and crouched down in front of the chair she was sitting in, so that he was at her eye level. "Amara," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "Your hands are shaking." "I know." He looked at her hands on the table, and then he did something she hadn't seen him do to her before. He put his hands over hers. Both of them. Not holding, just covering. The warmth of it arrived in her chest before she had processed the gesture. "The ballroom?" she said. "Handled. People—" The two who got through were contained before the main room. Guests were moved to the North Terrace as a precaution. They were told it was a security protocol. He paused. Some of them believed it. Marcus, unharmed. His wife also. A pause. Park Hyun-soo's security handled the east entrance independently. They're competent. And your brother? His hands didn't move. Gone, he said. He left the building before the incident began. She thought, of course he did. She thought, he planned the exit as carefully as he planned everything else. She thought, and Min-jae knows this, and he is sitting here with blood on his arm, and his hands over mine, and his brother is already somewhere else, clean, untouchable, waiting. What happens now? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Now we finish the night, he said, and tomorrow we address what comes next. Your brother? Yes. He's not going to stop. No, he said. He's not. She looked at their hands, his over hers, the blood on his forearm visible from this angle, dark and real. She thought about what he'd said in the corridor. I need you out of the room so I can move without thinking about where you are. She turned that sentence over and examined what it contained. Min-jae, she said. He looked at her. When this is over, when whatever comes next with your brother is over, what do you want? The question landed in the small room and sat there. He looked at her with the face she had learned to read, which was not an open face but was honest in its own way. The face of a man who has spent a long time being asked questions whose answers were tactical, and who was being asked one now whose answer was not. I want... He stopped. Started again. I haven't allowed myself to want things that don't have a clear operational function, he said, for a long time. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's not. She turned her hands over under his. He let her. She held his hands the way he had covered hers. Not dramatic, just there. The two of them sitting in a service conference room 1 floor below a wedding reception with a restrained man in the corner and blood on his shirt. You have a concussion to check for, she said, and your arm needs looking at. It's, I know, manageable. She stood. I'm going to need my hands back to help you with your sleeve. He looked at her for a long moment, then he let her hands go. She stood in front of him and pushed the torn sleeve up his forearm with the particular focus of a woman who has held a classroom of 7-year-olds together through fire drills and parent-teacher conferences and every other kind of managed crisis. And she examined the cut, not deep, but long, the kind that would need actual attention. And she said, there's a first aid kit in every floor's service corridor. I saw one on the way in. Amara. Don't. She looked up at him. Don't tell me it's fine. Don't minimize it. Just let me do this. He looked at her. Really looked. The way he had looked at her across the bar on the first night. That total, careful attention. And he said nothing. She went and got the first aid kit from the corridor. She came back and sat beside him and cleaned the cut with the focused, methodical attention of someone who understands that taking care of a concrete thing is sometimes the only available response to a situation too large to address all at once. And his breathing slowed the rest of the way back to its ordinary rate while she worked, and she felt him watching her face while she focused on his arm. And she did not look up because she knew, with the same below-logic certainty that had been operating since the bar, that if she looked up now, she would not be able to finish what she was doing. When she was done, she set the kit on the table. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen in the gallery, or the dinners, or the elevator, or the restaurant corridor. An expression that had no management in it. None of the contained, calibrated quality that was his ordinary presentation to the world. Raw. That was the word for it. A face that had stopped performing anything. She thought, this is who he is when he has run out of performance. She thought, I think I might be in love with this particular person, which is an extraordinary problem to have in a service corridor with a first aid kit on the table. She thought, I will think about that later. We need to go back up, she said. Yes, he said. And tomorrow we deal with your brother. Yes. She stood. She offered him her hand and he took it and stood. And the gesture was simple enough that it should have been unremarkable. And it was the opposite of unremarkable. And they both knew it. And neither of them said so because some things are already said by the fact of the hand and the taking of it. They went back to the elevator. The door closed. In the small mirrored space of the elevator car, rising back toward the floor where 200 people were being managed through the aftermath of a crisis they didn't fully understand, she looked at their reflection, her burgundy dress, his torn collar, his clean bandaged arm between them. And she thought, this is the most honest picture anyone has ever taken of me. The elevator reached the floor. The doors opened. And across the lobby that led back to the ballroom's terrace, standing precisely where he could be seen and where his position communicated maximum intent, was Kang Seong-jae. He had not left the building. He looked at the two of them in the open elevator with his social smile fully gone, and something underneath it that was not anger and not calculation, but the specific expression of a man who has run out of the kind of moves that can be executed at a distance and has arrived at the only move he has left. He had two men at his back. Min-jae stepped out of the elevator and placed himself between Seong-jae and Amara in a single, fluid motion, and his hand found her wrist for 1 second, stay, and then released. Seong-jae looked at Min-jae across the lobby, in the particular silence of two people who have been moving toward this moment for years and have finally run out of room between themselves and it. "I wasn't going to let you just walk away from here," Seong-jae said. "I know," Min-jae said. "You understand what tonight means. If you walk out of this building with her, with what you're building, you've made a choice that can't be unmade." "I made it downstairs," Min-jae said. Seong-jae looked at Amara. "You understand what you're choosing?" he said. "What his life actually is? What it will cost you?" She looked at him. She thought about the corridor and the chair and the first aid kit and the hand in the elevator. She thought about what it means to choose something in full possession of the truth of it. "Yes," she said. Seong-jae looked at her for a long moment with the last of his social construction entirely absent, and what was underneath it was something she hadn't expected. Not malice, not the cold calculation she had been braced for, but something older and more complicated. The face of a man who has spent years watching his own choices accumulate into something he cannot leave behind either. He looked back at Min-jae. "Then we finish this," he said. Min-jae said, "Yes," and took a step forward into the lobby, and behind her Amara heard the elevator doors close, and the lobby held the particular charged silence of a moment that has been building across years of a broken relationship between two brothers who both, in their different ways, had never stopped wanting the other to have chosen differently, and now there was no more distance left between them and the thing that was actually true. The lobby held its breath. Seong-jae stood 12 feet away with his two men at his back, and nothing left on his face that was performing anything, and Min-jae stood between him and Amara with the specific quality of stillness that she had learned over 3 weeks was not calm, but its opposite. The absolute compression of something that had been wound very tight for a very long time and had finally found the moment it was wound for. She did not step back. She understood, in the animal way that certain situations communicate their own rules, that stepping back was not available to her. Not because Min-jae would stop her. He had told her from the first day that she could always leave. It was not available because she had made a decision in a service corridor with a first aid kit on the table and a man looking at her with no performance left in his face, and that decision had weight, and weight does not permit retreat. Seong-jae looked at his brother. "You know what I'm going to say." "Yes," Min-jae said. "Then save us both the time." "No." The single syllable landed in the lobby with a finality that made one of Seong-jae's men shift his weight. The other one didn't move, which meant he was the more dangerous one, and Amara filed that away without knowing exactly what she would do with it. 11 years, Seong-jae said. His voice had changed, lower now, stripped of the social register entirely, carrying the particular roughness of something that had been rehearsed so many times it had worn through to the real thing underneath. "I built everything you're standing in. Every connection you used, every channel you moved through, every door that opened when you knocked. I built that." "I know," Min-jae said. "You were supposed to be protected from it." Something shifted in Seong-jae's jaw. "That was the original design. You stayed clean. You stayed outside. I kept you outside." "Until you needed someone to burn," Min-jae said. "Until I needed someone the other side would believe." He said it without flinching, which was its own kind of honesty. "You were 23. The charges wouldn't have stuck. I calculated the exposure. It was manageable." "For who?" Silence. "For who was it manageable, Seong-jae?" His brother looked at him with an expression that was the most human thing Amara had seen on his face, which made it worse rather than better. The expression of a man who has told himself a particular story for so long that he has lost the ability to locate the moment he started believing it. "I needed you inside," Seong-jae said. "I needed someone I could trust completely and you were the only person left I trusted. The situation, it wasn't designed to hurt you. It was designed to bring you in. By destroying the only thing I had that kept me separate from what you built. Your clean record, Seongjae's voice had gone flat. Yes. My choice, Min-jae said. You destroyed my ability to choose. The two brothers stood in the lobby of a tower hotel in Seoul, with a wedding reception winding down somewhere above them and the city visible through the glass walls on three sides, lit and enormous. And the silence between them had the density of something that had been compressed for 11 years and was only now being allowed to take its actual shape. Amara watched Min-jae's back, the set of his shoulders, the quality of his breathing, which she had learned to read the way she had learned to read everything about him, in the gaps, in the small physical signals that his face was too disciplined to transmit. He was not cold right now. He was the opposite of cold. What do you want from tonight? Min-jae said. Specifically. Seongjae looked at Amara. The look was not threatening. That was the thing that made her chest tighten. It was almost sad. I want you to understand what you're doing to her by letting her stay, he said. Tonight is a demonstration of what a normal Tuesday looks like in your life. Imagine what a year looks like. That's not your decision, Amara said. Both men looked at her. She had not planned to speak. The words had arrived before the decision did, the same way the chair had. You brought me here, she said to Seongjae. You arranged the invitation. You put me in proximity to your brother because you thought I'd be useful as leverage. You thought I'd be easy to use because I was desperate and grieving and outside my context. She held his gaze. You were wrong about what I'd become in 3 weeks, and you're wrong about what I'm deciding now. This is not your conversation to have on my behalf. Seongjae looked at her for a long moment. You're very composed for someone who just hit a man with a chair an hour ago. I teach 2nd grade, she said. You develop a high tolerance for chaos. Something moved across his face, brief, complicated, gone before she could name it. He looked back at Min-jae. She's not going to make you soft, he said. That's not what I'm afraid of. What I'm afraid of is that she's going to make you believe you can have both. And when you learn you can't, it will be her paying the cost. The cost is mine to decide, Min-jae said. You always say that. Because it's always true. Seongjae breathed in through his nose and out again slowly. He looked like a man who had come to a lobby with a plan and had found, upon arrival, that the plan had not accounted for the actual people involved in it, which, Amara thought, was the fundamental error he had been making for 11 years, accounting for variables without accounting for the person his brother actually was. The 3 men from tonight, Seongjae said, the ones who came through the service corridor, you think I sent them? I know you enabled them, Min-jae said. Whether you sent them or simply unlocked the door is a distinction without a practical difference. I unlocked the door, Seongjae said. I'm telling you that directly because we are past the point where I gain anything from lying about it. I told Rhee's people you would be here. I did not tell them to put anyone in the room with your woman. That was not the instruction. The quality of Min-jae's stillness changed. What was the instruction? A display, Seongjae said. Enough disruption to make the point that you are not untouchable, not in social settings, not when you are trying to build something that looks like an ordinary life. He paused. I did not intend for anyone to reach her. The lobby was very quiet. But they did, Min-jae said. Yes. Because you opened the door without controlling what came through. Seongjae said nothing. That is the difference between us, Min-jae said. You have always been willing to open doors without controlling what comes through and then call the result a miscalculation. I have spent 11 years cleaning up your miscalculations. He took one step forward. It ends tonight. Seongjae's jaw worked. You don't have the... I have everything, Min-jae said. I've had it for 8 months. The Hong Kong documentation, the original financial restructuring, the names of the people who were paid to accept my accountability for your transaction. He let that arrive. I have been waiting for you to give me a reason to use it that was clean enough that the people it needed to reach would understand what it meant. Seongjae's face had gone very still. What documentation? The kind that was supposed to have been destroyed, Min-jae said. The man you paid to destroy it kept a copy. People do that. They keep copies of things as insurance, and then they encounter situations where the insurance becomes more valuable than the loyalty. A pause. He came to me 14 months ago. 14 months ago. Amara felt the timeline reconfigure itself again. 14 months ago was when Min Jae had first known about her. 14 months ago was when a man had come to him with documentation, and a conversation had shifted the board in a way that had eventually led, through a chain of events that were and were not coincidental, to a bar in Gangnam and a woman putting a ring on a counter. She thought he had been building toward this for over a year. She thought, and somewhere in the construction of it, something had changed. She thought, I know when it changed because I was there when it changed. He was in a restaurant corridor and I had opened a door I wasn't supposed to open, and he had turned and seen me, and something in the geometry of the situation had shifted from operational to real. The documentation goes to 3 places simultaneously, Min Jae said. If I don't make a specific call in the next 30 minutes, one of those places is the prosecutor's office that has been building a case against the reorganization for 2 years. You are connected to the reorganization in ways that are now documented. He looked at his brother. You enabled tonight. Tonight is documented. The connection is current. Seongjae looked at him with the expression of a man watching the floor of a room he built discover it was built on the wrong foundation. You've been planning this since you gave me no other option, Min Jae said. I did not want this. I want you to understand that. I built this contingency because you left me no version of the future that did not require it. Every time I built something, you found a way to reach into it. Every time I created distance, you closed it. Tonight you put someone in a room with her. His voice stayed level. The level of it was its own kind of fury. So we are here. Seongjae's 2 men were very still. One of them was looking at Seongjae, waiting for instruction. The other, the one who hadn't shifted his weight earlier, was looking at the exit, which was its own kind of instruction about where things stood. What do you want from me? Seongjae said. His voice had changed again, lower, emptied of its social construction and its strategic register, carrying something that was neither of those things. Tired was what it was. The specific tiredness of someone who has been running a complex system for a long time and has arrived at the moment where the system will no longer run. I want you to transfer the Northern Channel holdings to the independent structure I've already established, Min Jae said. I want the reconnection severed in writing through your legal entity by the end of this week. I want the 3 names of the people present at the Hong Kong meeting who provided false witness. He paused. And I want you to walk out of this building tonight and not come back into any space I occupy. You're not asking me to face consequences, Seongjae said. You're asking me to retire. I'm giving you the option to retire, Min Jae said. The alternative is that the documentation goes where it goes and the consequences are not mine to manage. The lobby held everything. The marble floors and the distant sound of the city and the string quartet still playing somewhere above them, attenuated through floors of concrete and glass into something barely audible, almost ghostly. Seongjae looked at his brother for a long time. Amara watched his face cycle through something. Not calculation this time, something older than calculation. The face of a man confronting the version of a younger person he had shaped without permission and finding that the thing he shaped had exceeded the design. He looked at Amara. Take care of him, he said. He doesn't know how to ask for that. It was the last thing she expected him to say. She didn't answer. She held his gaze and let the words sit where they landed. Seongjae looked at Min Jae one last time. Something passed between them that she could not read and did not try to. It was not for her, that particular exchange. It belonged to 11 years and a decision made when Min Jae was 23 and the long, costly road that had led from that decision to this lobby. Then Seongjae turned, and his 2 men turned with him, and they walked through the lobby's main doors into the Seoul night and were absorbed by it. The lobby was quiet. Min Jae stood with his back to her for 4 seconds. She counted. Then he turned around and his face had the quality it had carried in the elevator. No management, no performance, just the actual face of the actual man. She crossed the lobby and stood in front of him. Your arm, she said. I know. The call you need to make, the 30 minutes. I know. He didn't move. He was looking at her with the full weight of the thing that had just happened still present in him, unprocessed, real. Amara. Make the call, she said. Tell them to hold. Then we go. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he took out his phone. She stood in the lobby of the Tower Hotel, and listened to him speak in Korean to someone on the other end of the line, brief and specific. And she looked out through the glass walls at the city. All that light, all that motion, the particular energy of Seoul at night, which was nothing like Atlanta, and which she had come to find, over 3 weeks, not foreign but simply different, a different frequency of the same basic human hum. He ended the call. "It's done," he said. "Then let's go." They left the building. The air outside was cool and carried the particular quality of a city late in the evening. Food smells and exhaust, and somewhere distant a sound that might have been music. His car was at the curb. His driver, a compact, quiet man named June, who had driven her twice during the training weeks and had always behaved as though the universe contained exactly what it needed to contain and nothing more, got out and opened the door without comment, glancing briefly at Min Jae's torn collar and the bandage on his arm, and returning his gaze to the middle distance with the equanimity of a man who has seen more than he references. They got in. The car moved into Seoul's late traffic. She sat beside him, and they didn't speak for several minutes, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have been through something together and are letting the throughness of it settle before they try to put language on it. She looked at his hands in his lap. Steady. The kind of steady that costs something. "The school," she said. "Bright futures. The foundation money." "Yes." "It stays," she said. "Whatever happens between you and Marcus, whatever the restructuring looks like, the grant doesn't get pulled. Those are children." "The grant was already structured as a 3-year irrevocable commitment," he said. "It survives any changes to the holding entity. I made sure of that when it was established." She looked at him. "You made sure?" "Yes. When you were still just a name in a document to me, when you hadn't met me." "Yes." She turned that over. A man who funded a school with irrevocable commitment before he knew the person whose name was embedded in the foundation title, through an ex-fiancé who used it as a romantic gesture without disclosing the source. A man who had kept that detail clean, even when everything around it was complicated. "Why?" she said. He looked out the window at the city moving past. "Because the children were real," he said. "They didn't have anything to do with any of it. It seemed," he paused, "wrong to make their funding contingent on anything else." She sat with that. "Min Jae," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to need a few days," she said, "to think. Not about whether I know where I am on that question, but about what it looks like. Practically. My life is in Atlanta. My classroom. My students. My mother, who is going to have approximately 47,000 questions that I don't have answers to yet." "I know," he said. "I'm not walking away from this." "I know," he said again, and what was in his voice was something she had not heard there before. Not relief exactly, but the sound of a man setting something down that he had been carrying at a careful distance from his body for a long time. "But I need you to understand that I'm not just stepping into your world," she said. "You'd be stepping into mine too. Whatever this is, it goes both ways. I don't disappear into your life. You don't disappear into mine." She looked at him steadily. "We build something that belongs to both of us." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a more complicated thing to build than you're making it sound." "I know," she said. "I'm a teacher. Complicated things are my profession." He looked at her and the ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but the anterior of one. The thing that lives in a face just before it decides to smile. She thought, "I want to see him actually smile. I will make that a project." The car arrived at Sujin's building. June pulled to the curb and waited. Min Jae got out and opened her door, which she had told him 3 times during the training weeks was unnecessary, and which he had continued to do each time with the quiet consistency of a man who has decided that some things are not a performance but simply what he does. She stood on the pavement in her burgundy dress, with the city around her, and looked at him. "You should sleep," she said. "Your arm needs real attention in the morning, not tape and gauze from a corridor kit. I know a doctor. I assume you know several doctors who don't ask questions." "Yes." "Make an appointment." She held his gaze. "That's not a suggestion." Something settled in his expression. "All right," he said. She looked at him. The torn collar, the bandaged arm, the face with its ordinary management partially restored and partially not. The face of a man who had spent 11 years building a fortress around himself and had arrived at an evening where several walls of it had come down, not violently, but necessarily, the way things come down when they've served their purpose and the person inside them has grown past the need. She reached up and straightened the collar of his shirt. It was a small gesture, and she did it without thinking, and the doing of it without thinking was itself the truest thing she could have said about where they were. He stood very still while she did it. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. She went inside. Sujin was awake. Of course, Sujin was awake. She had spent the evening receiving updates through channels that Amara had not inquired too closely about, and was sitting on the couch, with her knees drawn up, and a cup of tea going cold in her hands, and an expression that was equal parts relief and the particular exasperation of a woman whose best friend had spent 3 weeks becoming a person she only partly recognized. "You hit a man with a chair," Sujin said. "It was available," Amara said. She took off her shoes at the door. Her feet were aching with the specific complaint of feet that have been in formal footwear through an emotionally and physically demanding evening. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Min-jae?" "His arm. He'll see someone tomorrow." Sujin looked at her with the searching, honest attention of a person who has known you for 15 years and is attempting to read the current version of you against the stored archive of all previous versions. "So," she said. "So," Amara said. "You're staying." It wasn't a question. Amara sat down beside her on the couch and picked up the cold tea and drank some of it anyway. "I'm going home first," she said. "I need to go home. I need to see my classroom. I need to tell my mother things in person that cannot be told on the phone." She paused. "And then I'm coming back." Sujin was quiet for a moment. "It's going to be complicated," she said. "Everything worth anything is complicated," Amara said. "You told me that, junior year, when you were deciding whether to stay in Seoul after graduation." "I was talking about a city." "So was I," Amara said. "Among other things." Sujin looked at her for another long moment, and then she put her head on Amara's shoulder with the ease of 15 years of friendship and said nothing, which was the precisely right thing. They sat like that for a while with the cold tea and the Seoul night outside the window and the specific quiet of an evening that has held more than most evenings are asked to hold. 3 days later, Amara sat across from Marcus Chen at a coffee place near the hotel where he and Ji-yeon were staying before their flight to Bali. She had requested the meeting. He had agreed with the particular promptness of a man who has been expecting a difficult conversation and prefers to have it on a timeline he can control. He looked tired. The wedding had clearly not been the seamless event he'd planned, and the management of what had happened, the security incident, the guests who'd needed to be calmed, the official explanations that satisfied no one entirely, had taken its toll on what should have been the first days of his marriage. He also looked, she noted, older than he had across the ballroom. Not in years, in the face. The specific aging that happens when a decision you made in the confidence of certainty reveals its actual cost. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it with the cadence of someone who has prepared the sentence and is delivering it as accurately as possible. "What I did at the altar, I know," she said. "I'm not here for the apology." He looked at her. "Then what are you here for?" She set her coffee cup down. "The foundation," she said. "MCB Education Initiative." He stilled. "I know where the capital came from," she said. "I know it came through Min-jae's holding entity. I know you used his money and embedded my name in the foundation title without telling me either of those things." She held his gaze. "I want to know why." He was quiet for a moment. She waited. She had learned from Min-jae that waiting was its own kind of power. Not aggressive, not demanding, just present, and often more effective than any question. "I wanted you to think it was mine," he said. The gesture. I needed you to see me as someone capable of that kind of thing. The kind of man who funds schools and thinks about the future." And he stopped, started again. "I had borrowed substantially from Min-jae's organization, business development. The terms were structured in ways that I didn't fully understand when I agreed to them, and by the time I understood them, I was too far in to renegotiate." A pause. "The foundation was his idea originally. A way to demonstrate community investment through my name. I asked for your school specifically." "Why?" He looked at her hands on the table. "Because I knew it mattered to you. he said, and I thought, if I could make something matter to you through me, even indirectly, it would mean I was the person I was trying to be with you, the version of myself I could never quite sustain in practice. He looked up. I failed at that. Yes, she said. You did. I failed at a lot of things with you. Yes. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has made a significant error and is adult enough to understand it fully and young enough to still be surprised by his own capacity for it. You seem very calm, he said. I am calm, she said. I've had a complicated 3 weeks. I heard that you and Marcus. She said it cleanly, not unkindly. That's not what we're here for either. He nodded. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. The foundation money, he said. It's legitimate. Whatever happens with Minji's organization, the grant is irrevocable. He told me that when it was structured. He was very specific about it. I know, she said. He told me the same thing. Marcus stopped. He looked like he was choosing his next words with the care of a man navigating a field he's only partially mapped. He's not what I expected when I first got involved with his organization. I thought I understood what I was dealing with. I didn't. Most people don't, she said. Do you? She picked up her coffee. I'm learning, she said. She left the coffee place and walked a block in the Seoul morning, which was crisp and bright and full of the particular energy of a city going about its business with the indifference to individual drama that all large cities share. She stopped at a crosswalk and waited for the light. Her phone rang. Her mother. She answered. Baby, her mother said, in the specific tone that contained an entire weather system of maternal anxiety. Tell me what's happening. Destiny called me and told me approximately 1/4 of a thing, and then said to ask you, and I have been— Mama, Amara said. I'm okay. That's not an answer. I know. The light changed. She crossed with the crowd, phone to her ear. I'm coming home on Saturday. I'll tell you everything in person. Everything means more than I think I want to hear, her mother said. Probably, Amara said. But you'll want to hear it anyway. A beat. Is he good to you? Amara thought about a lobby and a first aid kit and a hand covering hers on a table. She thought about a man who made the grant irrevocable before he knew her name attached to anything but a document. She thought about an elevator mirror and a torn collar and the ghost of something in a face that was almost, not quite yet, but almost, a smile. Yes, she said. He's good to me. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Saturday, she said. You're making my sweet potato pie while you explain. Deal. She ended the call and stood on the pavement in Seoul with the city moving around her and thought about Saturday, which was 4 days away, and about Atlanta, which was a 13-hour flight and a different life that she was going back to, and also not entirely going back to, because the version of herself who had left Atlanta for Seoul was not the version standing on this pavement, and there was no rerouting that version back to where she'd started any more than you can unlearn how to read. Her grandmother's ring was on her right hand where it had been since the beginning. She looked at it in the morning light, the rose gold, the old setting, the small diamond that caught the sun differently depending on the angle. 53 years her grandmother had worn this, worn it through everything, through the deaths and the moves and the arguments and the years, where love was not a feeling but a daily decision made in the full knowledge of everything the other person was and was not. For the woman you're becoming. She had thought, when she read that note 4 years ago, that she understood what it meant. She understood now that she had understood one layer of it. There were more. She walked back toward the hotel where she was staying. She had moved from Sujin's couch to a room of her own 2 days ago, a quiet decision that Min-jae had arranged without her asking and that she had accepted without making it larger than it was. A room of her own. That was right. That was the right shape for this particular moment. Min-jae was in the lobby when she arrived. He was sitting in one of the low chairs near the window with his phone in his hand, not looking at it, looking at the street. His arm was properly bandaged now, real wrapping, professional, visible below the sleeve of his jacket which he'd rolled to the elbow. He had slept. She could tell by the quality of his face, which had some of its ordinary containment restored, not as armor this time, but simply as the natural expression of a man who had processed something overnight and arrived at a working relationship with it. He saw her and stood. She crossed the lobby to him, and they stood facing each other with the morning light coming through the window and the hotel moving around them in its ordinary way. The check-ins and the luggage carts and the staff and the other guests, all of it indifferent to the specific weight of two people arriving at a moment they had been moving toward for 3 weeks without knowing it was this moment specifically they were moving toward. "How was it?" he said. He meant Marcus. "Complete," she said. "It's done." He nodded. "Your arm," she said. "Seen to. It'll heal cleanly." "The documentation, Seong-jae." "His legal team contacted mine this morning," he said. "The terms are being drafted. It will take several weeks to finalize, but the structure holds." She looked at him. "And him? Your brother? How are you?" The question arrived in the space between them with its full weight, and he let it land and considered it honestly, which was the thing she had come to expect from him, and which still surprised her in the way that the right things always surprise you by continuing to be right. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'll tell you when I do." "Okay," she said. They went to a small restaurant 3 blocks from the hotel, the kind of place with 6 tables and a handwritten menu and food that arrived without ceremony and was better than it had any obligation to be. They sat across from each other and ate and talked. Not about Seong-jae or Marcus or foundations or lobbies, but about other things. She told him about her classroom, the specific chaos of 22 second graders on a Friday afternoon. The boy named Devante, who had been struggling with reading since September, and who had, 3 days before she left for Seoul, read an entire page out loud without stopping once, and the expression on his face when he finished, which was the reason she did what she did. Minji listened with the quality of attention she had learned to recognize as genuine and not performed. He asked 2 questions, not the polite social variety, but the kind that meant he had been following closely and wanted to understand something specifically. She asked him about London. He had studied there for 3 years and had never spoken about it, and she wanted to know what it had been like. 21 years old, first time outside Korea for an extended period, in a city that did not operate on any of the social codes he had grown up navigating. He told her, carefully at first, then with less care, the specific disorientation of the first winter, which was a different quality of cold than anything he had experienced. A professor of financial theory who had conducted seminars by taking the class to pubs because he believed that economic principles became clearer when discussed in proximity to the practical management of limited resources. A period of 6 weeks where he had spoken to almost no one outside of academic settings and had found, unexpectedly, that he did not mind it as much as he'd expected to, which had taught him something about himself that he was still not entirely sure how to interpret. She listened. She asked her own questions. They sat in the small restaurant for 2 hours, and the afternoon moved around them, and when they finally left, the food was gone and the table had been cleared and reset for evening service, and the proprietor had stopped looking at them with the patient expression of someone waiting for a table to turn, and had started looking at them with the different expression of someone who has seen enough of human beings to recognize when 2 of them are having a conversation that matters. Outside, the Seoul afternoon was tipping toward evening. The light was changing. That particular quality of late afternoon light in spring that makes everything look briefly like a version of itself that will not last and is better for that. They stood on this pavement. "Saturday," she said. "My flight is Saturday morning." "I know." "I'll be back in 3 weeks," she said. "I need to finish the school year. It's 3 weeks from the end of term. I can't leave my class without finishing." "I know," he said again. "I would not ask you to." She looked at him. "When I come back, we figure out the practical things. What it looks like, how it works. I'm not going to pretend that's a small conversation." "It's not," he said. "But we have it," she said, "together. Not you deciding and presenting me with a structure. Not me making adjustments to fit your existing architecture. Together." He looked at her with the face that was becoming, gradually and by increments, a face she could read more fully than any other face she knew. "Together," he said. "Yes." She nodded. That was enough for now. She put her hand out. Not for a handshake, a different gesture, one that she made without planning it, her hand open at her side with her palm toward him, an offering that was also a question. He looked at her hand. He took it. They stood on the pavement in Seoul in the late afternoon light, with the city doing what cities do and their hands between them, and it was not a dramatic moment. It was the opposite, small, private, the size of exactly what it was. Two people who had both lost things they couldn't recover and had arrived, through separate and intersecting roads, at a point where the future was visible and genuinely unknown and possible. That was enough. That was, she thought, actually more than enough. They walked back toward the hotel in the evening light, and Seoul was loud and beautiful and indifferent and fully itself, and she was fully herself. Not the woman who had walked out of a church in Atlanta with flowers she had set down carefully on an altar step. Not the woman who had arrived in this city desperate to perform a version of herself that had moved on. Just herself. Amara Brooks, 34 years old, second grade teacher. Woman who owned a ring that had spent 53 years on another woman's hand and knew, now, what becoming actually meant. Her grandmother's ring caught the light as they walked. Rose gold, old setting, small diamond, doing what diamonds do. Refusing to be diminished by ordinary circumstances, finding the available light and using it. She kept walking. Minji kept pace beside her. Ahead of them the city opened up, enormous and specific and full of everything that had not happened yet.